was doing that. Got a crib from Wikipedia a little bit. So, citizen journalism, the concept of citizen journalism, also known as public, participatory, democratic, guerrilla, or street journalism, is based upon public citizens playing an active role in the processing of collecting, reporting, and analyzing and disseminating news and information. Similarly, Courtney C. Ratsch, that's your R-E-D-S-C-H, defines citizen journalism, quotes, as an alternative and activist form of news gathering and reporting that functions outside mainstream media institutions, often as a repose to shortcomings in the professional journalistic field. That uses similar journalistic practices but is driven by different objectives and ideas, and relies on alternative sources of legitimacy than traditional or mainstream journalism. And Jay Rosen proposes a simpler definition: when the people, formerly known as the audience, employ the press tools they have in their possession to inform one another. I'll get back to the Conference for Media Reform. It's a national conference held every 2 or 3 years. I attended it twice myself. The first time was in 2005 in St. Louis. And I recall the keynote speaker at that particular conference was now Senator Al Franken from Minnesota. And he opened his keynote the best way possible. Unless you're desperately in need of a new liver, please turn off your cell phones. And of course, at the time, he had just finished writing a book called Lies and the Lying Liars Who Tell Them. You guys familiar with that book?
I have.
That's a great book, isn't it? Yeah, that was a great experience. Unfortunately, I wound up sleeping through a lot of it, because at the time I was working as a security officer, working nights and everything. And so I was used to being up at night and not during the days. But it was still fun. And then I went again in 2008. This time it was in Minneapolis. And first of all, Bill Moyers gave the opening speech Saturday, and afterwards, this made Keith Olbermann's show. A couple of Bill O'Reilly's people. I stalked Bill Moyers and tried to get some dirt from him, and he wound up turning the tables on him. It was like, and they just stormed out. It was beautiful. And that particular time, I actually met with the guys who run the Writers Guild of America, the Screenwriters Union. Pretty nice guys. And it also explains a little trip I had from going from Minneapolis and winding up in San Antonio on the way home. And that's a story for another time. The courts have basically said the legislature isn't funding education enough, K through 12, and the Republicans in charge of the legislature are doing nothing about it. So they got sued again, and that's at the Supreme Court now. And I guess she made mention of it in her constituents' newsletter. So Zach responds back, and here's that full exchange. I'm just going to read it out. Representative Grossroad, I received a copy of your newsletter entitled Update Week 5. You are not my elected official, so I reviewed your background. According to the Kansas House website, you serve on the House Standing Committee on Education. Also, your website stated that you obtained a bachelor's in elementary education. Here's my problem. You have made a number of comments that are critical of the Kansas educational system, yet you sent out a newsletter that contains numerous grammatical errors. I stopped counting after 20. This highlights concerns about your ability to direct education policy in Kansas, 2 periods. If you send out a document containing these errors, how can you effectively represent a child's interest? I host a weekly podcast on Kansas politics and would love to hear your side of the story. Please let me know if you're available in March to record a podcast session. Here's Amanda Grossroad's response. Dear Zach, I'm sorry that you find problems with my newsletters, though you may want to double check your own writing when criticizing another's. See below. The newsletters are designed for my constituents in order to inform them of house happenings. These newsletters have always been on the informative side and have been available for all without regard to political party or ideology. Please list all these critical statements I have made regarding education. Having taught within the public school system, I do understand the system and support the educating of the children within our state. While you may disagree, I think there is room for much discussion about what works, what doesn't, positives, negatives, and different proposals and options. Recognizing your name, I initiated a Google search, and this leads me to believe that your podcast is probably partisan in nature, and thus I shall not be accepting your invitation to appear. Sincerely. And Zach's reply, Representative Grossroad, I would recommend a review of your prior statements on the Kansas educational system. The quoted language below showcases your basic lack of understanding of the Kansas Constitution, Article 6, Section 6B, which states, quotes, the legislature shall make suitable provision for finance of the educational interests of the state. In your legislative updates, News from Topeka, January 20th, 2013, quote, last week, we received the jolt of news when a 3-judge panel ruled that the state legislature must fund education at a set level in the base state aid per pupil. I strongly disagree with this ruling because no matter what one's feelings is on the issue of school finance, it is not the role of the courts to order specific appropriations. That is the role of the legislature duly elected by the people. This is not a jolt of news. The Kansas Supreme Court, beginning with the 2005 Montoy case and culminating with Gannon, which is the current case, have stated that the Kansas legislature has not funded schools to the appropriate level. The Kansas Supreme Court relied upon empirical data to reach the decision that the Kansas legislature was not meeting its constitutional duties. The Supreme Court has correctly pointed out that you have failed in your role to properly fund education. Are you asserting that the BSAPP is funded at an appropriate level and the elective officials have done their job? The facts would strongly disagree with your assertion. I am a registered Democrat. My podcast, however, is an attempt to hear all sides of an issue. It is not partisan in nature. I do not edit for content. Well, I don't edit for content. And any statements you make will not be altered. This is an opportunity for you to address concerns that voters may have about your voting record. As a public official, you should welcome any opportunity to engage in a healthy debate on the issues of the day. My concern as a voter is that you will only appear on programs and with people like Ben Hodge that support your position. Finally, I failed to correct the double period and the about of that you mentioned. Thank you for pointing these out. We should all peer review before sending out a document. My errors, however, were not included in the letters sent to constituents, nor do I vote on public policy matters that impact Kansas schools. My invitation stands. I would love to have you on the program. End of letter. Well, as retaliation, then we sent the camera and got some more interesting stuff from Ms. Grossroad, namely that she homeschools her kids, and she sits on this education committee. So yeah, that's the beauty of citizen journalism right there. You find out stuff that's the more mainstream journalists probably can't, or I'm going to lean more towards can't find, and in some cases probably won't. All right, so let's take a couple minutes to talk about some of the forms of citizen journalism that are available. They're almost all online nowadays. It's probably the easiest and most effective way to get your message out to your audience. The first one, the most basic one, is blogging. I know a lot of people like the WordPress blogs. I prefer Blogspots myself. Any blog service that offers their service for free, have at it.
What was the first one you mentioned?
WordPress.
WordPress.
And my preferred one, of course, is Blogspot. And the blog is pretty much the basic form you need if you're doing a podcast or a video series or whatever. That's critical, because when you do a podcast, all your audio files are going to go through and be posted on the blog. So, blogging in of itself is pretty easy. Just get on the computer, get on your blog, and start typing away. Podcasting, a couple of notes on that. Well, the first one is get your blog started. Get your audio equipment, which means you're going to need a pretty decent quality microphone. We have several for Sunflower Brew. Our primary mic is what's called a Yeti. Pretty big mic. And then we have a couple of travel mics. Zach's travel mic is a snow globe. And this is my travel mic right here. So I'm going to pass that around. Yeah, be sure you have travel mics available. Get good recording software. We usually record, if we're using Zach's computer, we're always recording on something called Audacity. Audacity is the name of the software. A-U-D-A. Audacity is the name of the software. If we're using my computer to do a podcast, I use GarageBand, which is primarily a music composition program, but we can also use it for podcasting. And it's actually in the GarageBand that I edit the Sunflower Brew podcast. And that brings me to web hosting as well. For both these podcasts, actually, I use Podbean as my host. That is podbean.com. drawback with this is the free service will limit you to 50 megs at any one time. So that means that when you're doing your podcast, you're constantly going to be cycling out old stuff.
You said 7 minutes at a time?
50 megs.
50 minutes.
2 megabytes at a time. Which is much more than 7 minutes. So,
About how long is that?
I'd say a couple of hours.
Okay.
We use Podbean, and we also use Dropbox, Dropbox.com. So I'll take Sunflower Brew as an example. When we're done recording with Zach, we'll put the unedited podcast into a Dropbox folder, so I can pick it up on my computer, edit, and then publish it. And then it also doubles as an archive for us. So I'll just leave all the stuff we've done so far up there, and when the show gets cycled out, I'll post the link from the Dropbox to the Sunflower Brew websites. Go from there. Video podcasting, web series, web video, whatever you want to call it. It's just the video aspects of everything. You'll need a camera, or I guess with cell phones and iPads nowadays, they have cameras in them as well. Those work just as well as that camera, which cost $1,000 back in the day, but it still works and everything. So, you'll need a camera. If you can get good software, I highly recommend it. I use professional software myself, Adobe Premiere Pro. But that said, if you're not doing it professionally, then something like iMovie or Windows Movie Maker or something like that works just as well too. And with the video, you can, if you have a YouTube account, you can use that to post your video. And one of the things I like about YouTube is that those videos are very easy to share. And of course, another form of citizen journalism you might not think about is just using your social media, your Facebook and your Twitter. I think it was the protests in the Middle East. They used Twitter to get the news out. The last couple of years during that whole situation, they used Twitter to disseminate information and everything. So that's pretty cool. And last but not least, there's always the friendly comment section on the more mainstream media sites. So like you see something on the Kansas City Star website and you want to comment on that, by all means feel free to comment, throw in your 2 cents and everything. That still counts as citizen journalism. So has anyone done anything close to citizen journalism before today? And if so, you care to share it with us?
I do participate a lot in talk radio, just calling in, listening to what's being said and just doing the research on the fly and then responding. Of course, it's not video. There's no video involved in that.
Still journalism.
Yeah.
So can you give us an example of one time you might have called in and what the story was about? Or?
I think they were doing sort of like a series on the Occupy Wall Street. And, I just kind of called in with my observations because I went down to the encampment to just see, exactly, what was going on. And when I went down there was somebody videotaping me, just for showing up. And I don't know if they were really videotaping me or just trying to intimidate me with a camera or, what that was all about, But I just kind of did a running series of my reports from the encampment.
Oh, cool. That's a very cool one. Yeah, this Wikipedia file, they do talk about the Occupy movements. Occupy protests also were influenced by live interactive media coverage through citizen journalists such as Tim Pool and the Citizen Journals on Facebook. So it sounds like they were engaged in citizen journalism as well. From what you said, it sounds like they might have been a little more aggressive than they probably should have been. Just keep calm, relax. If someone wants to talk to you, then they'll come to you. That's just that's the way I see it. And having worked with reporters and with student media, it's up to the reporter to find people to talk with on camera.
Yes. Usually it's someone like KCR has a couple of call-in shows, and they'll have someone in that I know that the interview's being staged. They don't really think that somebody's going to call in that has an opposing view.
By the way, what's your take? Do you think there is a bias in talk radio?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the sponsors, you follow the money. That's kind of like my byword. You follow the money and you find out exactly, what's going on. If you've got, let's say, for example, KCUR Up to Date, and Steve Kraske is interviewing someone from Block, and you look and see, that certain institutions are giving their money, or the Kansas City Business Journal is doing an angle. You can just look at the advertising that's surrounding the article, and you know what position they're supporting.
Cool. Yeah, that's one of the things I've noticed since getting involved in media reform and citizen journalism myself is the whole discussion of media bias. There are outlets out there, I think, that have a conservative media bias. Most of talk radio, for example, and Fox News. You talked about Kraske a little bit. I think he leans to the right as well.
Oh, definitely. Because they want people to contribute to the radio station that had that background. Most liberals do not contribute to community radio stations.
Keith Olbermann had a great response to that. Why don't liberals do well on talk radio? He said, well, because most of the good talk radio shows are during the day, and liberals have things to do, namely work.
But if you have enough money that you have leisure time, you can do something like that too. I mean, you can say it's conservative, but to me, it's kind of like you look at somebody like the Koch brothers. They're conservative for a reason. They've got industries that they want to protect. They're not going to have somebody come on, the Tribune newspaper and write an article that talks about, deforestation because they have Bounty paper towels. That eats into their business. So, they're going to buy that paper so that to make sure that nobody's going to write anything against what they've got their best interest in.
And that I've read about that's their attempts to squelch opposition by buying newspapers or there was a documentary that was going to be on PBS. That's another good example called Citizen Coke that they stopped because they didn't want to offend the Koch brothers. It's just someone with ties to our local PBS station. That doesn't sound right. I thought PBS's position was we're supposed to be a classroom to America.
Public broadcast.
Yeah, it's public television, yes. But
I think it has to have a bit of a liberal bent though.
PBS?
Yeah, I would think it would to some degree. But do you think it does? Or do you
Well,
think it
I will
doesn't?
say this in terms of KCPT. I can't speak for all of PBS, but KCPT, their stated position is they don't take a position.
Right.
I can give an example of this whole bias. There's a perception in our local media that Kansas Democrats don't exist. Well, I'm a Kansas Democrat. I'm sitting right here talking to y'all about this, and that was in the story goes a little like this. It was during my internship there. They had the current governor, who hopefully will soon be the ex-governor, on the weekend review program, talking one-on-one with Nick. After that interview, this goes in a little more how the current administration in Kansas treats media that doesn't exactly agree with him, because Nick, even though he went at the governor with legitimate questions like, why did you censor Emma Sullivan, who was at the time a senior at Shawnee Mission East High School, and tweeted, he blows a lot. And she got in major trouble for that, and was almost forced to apologize by the school for doing that. So why did you go after her for that? Why did you cut the entire budget of the Kansas Arts Commission? Legitimate questions like that, and I guess the governor's people took offense to that because we were getting ready to go to lunch after that interview, and Nick's in the lobby there at KCPT being chewed out by the governor's people. After lunch, we come back. We're getting ready to do an interview for the local show. In fact, this was the interview with Kai Kamara, formerly of Sporting KC, and Nick, because he's British, was brought in to do the interview because it's about soccer and everything. And Nick notices I'm behind the camera again and says, well, I noticed that the governor didn't come back and shake hands with you before the interview. Man, don't worry about it, Nick. Well, I thought maybe you would have liked to meet someone who likely voted for him. And, no, I voted for the other guy, Tom Holland. Nick's response, I swear to God, oh, you're the one! And that's the end. Yeah, exactly, got a lot of laughs. But it is instructive that that's the view that's the Kansas City media has. If you live in Kansas, you must be not a Democrat. No, there's 80,000 of them in Johnson County alone. So not monolithic, but still pretty sizable.
I think people think that because doesn't the voting go that the way that if somebody gets 60% of the vote, they take all the votes? Is that kind of the way it goes in Kansas?
It's a simple majority.
Simple majority.
Yeah. Back to media bias, and you see this in the national media too. Everyone says, well, there's a liberal media bias. Baloney. I keep stressing that there's no such thing as liberal media bias in the mainstream media in the United States.
No such thing?
No. If there is a bias, it's the the one thing we have to remember about mainstream media in the United States is that it's corporate owned.
Mhm.
So they're gonna say, so you'll hear them say, ABC, NBC, CNN, CBS, they're all liberally biased, everything, and that's baloney, because when's the last time CNN were really did anything negative against Time Warner, or, their parent company, or ABC? When was the last time they reported anything negative about Disney? Stuff like that. If the media was really liberally biased, they'd go after, they'd keep a check on their parent companies.
Well, I think you have to make a distinction between liberal politics and liberal economics. Because you could say PBS has a liberal bent, but it's from a social standpoint.
Right.
It's not from a political or economic standpoint.
Okay, I would agree with that. If there is a bias in the mainstream media, it's they want to get the story as right as possible. That's my takeaway of that. Of course, I also take the opinion stated by Bill Maher, the comedian, that in America there is no left anymore. The Democrats have moved to the center, and the Republicans have moved into a mental hospital.
You got crazies on both sides.
Yeah, I think it's so extreme now.
And that's what people are being turned off about, is the extremism on both
Yeah.
sides.
They were voted in, so. Sometimes why they have.
Yeah.
I think the bias, the media bias is not in what they report, but in what they choose not to report. I see a lot of things, my boyfriend was like, oh, look, they're focusing on that, but they're not even talking about this. Why aren't they reporting it? And it's always, when he says that, it's always something liberal that hasn't been reported, it's something, why didn't they say Obama did this, or something, and he's always saying that, so that's all I hear, but I can see it on both sides, the underreporting or total unreporting, if you will, of things that should have been,
But that's
and they knew it should have been.
But that's kind of journalism. If you're writing a book, you're not really going to give the other side in the book because you're making a case.
I hate to interject, but one thing I would say is that there is a massive bias towards sensationalism, period.
Yeah.
If it's going to shock people or get people to watch it, then they will do that. But sometimes, things that people may seem even more shocking, but that are hard to explain, they won't put on just because no one's going to pay attention to it, even if maybe they should. And I think that happens on both sides.
Well, and that's that dumbing down. People don't have those critical thinking skills to be able to look at something. It's just like I became aware of people like Gretchen Morgenstern from listening to Terry Gross on Fresh Air. That's not mainstream stuff anymore. And she's explaining to you what happened with the debt crisis. Well, not the debt crisis, but the housing crisis. With the credit default swap. She explains all of that. And also Matt Taibbi, who's also with, he writes for Rolling Stone.
I've seen him on MSNBC.
Yeah. And it's not mainstream stuff because people's eyes kind of glaze over, when you start talking about economics or politics. But if you talk about Kim Kardashian, they're right there.
Of course.
They can, that's accessible to them.
I don't understand that.
Yeah, it's kind of rough.
I remember that back in, I grew up in the Chicago area, and when that started changing to the sensationalism, that model, I could see it changing, and one of the news anchors there quit. I said, I'm not going to do that, and people said, oh, you're going to be sorry, and I don't think he ever really was sorry, because he just didn't believe in it, and it just changed so drastically. All of a sudden, it was
school for
And more
journalism,
bias.
yeah, if you go to school for
That's
journalism, it's like, what do I do now?
Yeah.
You know, I'm not a celebrity, I'm not an
Yeah.
infotainer.
Yeah.
What do I do with the 40 years that I wasted all that money for?
Yeah.
Where do I go?
I think citizen journalism maybe has come out of that. You know, it was the occasional
Yeah.
letter to the editors ever.
Right.
And all of a sudden it's like, no, I need to say more because these people are not saying anything.
Absolutely.
You know?
And they also like to reinforce stereotypes. I'm going to go back to Steve Krasky, because I listen to him a lot. And he was doing a report. He had a police chief on his show, and he was doing a report about the increase in crime in Johnson County. And the police chief was trying to tell him, you know, that the people that live in Johnson County who are residents there, losing their jobs and the crime is increasing. And Steve Krasky kept trying to interject. Well, isn't it people that are coming in from the inner city that are coming? He kept telling him, no, no, no. And so Steve Krasky was going to make this guy say, you know, you could hear the exasperation of the police chief on the air because Steve Krasky is editorializing.
And that police chief is right. It's called economic capitalism.
Yeah.
Something I learned about when I was running for the city council. You see it, yeah, starkly in Loveland Park. The northern part where I live, by the way, is older and a little more depressing. And everyone's moving out south, away from the city and everything. And yeah, you could just tell it really is a story of two Loveland Parks.
Even the drug use that's increasing in Overland Park, it's not from people who are economically deprived. It's from people who have money. And that's where the drug use is increasing.
Sure. And one other thing about the whole bias thing, I think it's funny that those on the right want to characterize Obama as a socialist or a communist or heck even a fascist. I've heard. Well, of course, fascism and communism are the two different extremes on either side. They're fundamentally incompatible with one another. And I knew back when he was running for office the first time, 2008. So this guy's as centrist as it gets. So there's nothing. He's really not a socialist. And they want to point to the Affordable Care Act as an example of socialism. It's not socialism. It's giving money to corporations. It's about as corporations as you can get. In fact, it was a Republican idea before Obama took over.
Well,
If it was anything remotely socialist, they would have included the public insurance option, which ironically the Democrats killed by the name of Kent Conrad.
Yeah, well, even the bank bailout, that told me everything I needed to know about his administration.
The thing is, I fear that we're never going to be able to elect true progressives as presidents or anything because the country is skewed farther right, as again Bill Maher suggested. That the left would move to the center and the right had moved to a funny farm.
Well, all the people who voted for Obama and helped get him elected thought they were electing a progressive. So you can't elect one, you just can't have a bait and switch.
Right. Right, but even I knew that he was moderate. So. All right. Any other questions, comments?
Do you do consulting?
I think it should start. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Oh, nothing else. I'd say thank y'all for coming out.
Thank you.
I hope you learned something today.
Thank you.
Yeah.